Hey y'all, this is Blair with the Live and Learn Gardening channel, and today we are going to talk about compost. This is probably my favorite gardening topic of all things. You would think it was about growing the vegetables for me. For me, it's about soil health and understanding the environment. And I guess one of the things I realized when I first started gardening was how expensive good compost, but even more so, good fertilizer is. And the recent uptick in fertilizer prices and all of the news and maybe just in my corner of the internet, articles on depleted soil value across the world. Specifically, I've read a lot of articles about it in Europe about how the soil used to be, this thick of, wonderful nutritious soil, or this thick or whatever it is. And it's getting less and less every year, and we're having horrible soil erosion, especially in places where we use heavy fertilizer and don't use the sustainable practices of kind of feeding the life in the soil. We feed the plants. To give you a little bit of context, when you use fertilizer and pesticides as a combination to feed your plants, you're feeding the plant, but you're not feeding the microorganisms in the soil. In organic farming, especially when you're using compost instead of fertilizer as your source of nutrition, you're using you're actually not feeding the plants, you're feeding the microorganisms that then feed the plants. So you're giving compost and broken down matter to various bacteria and fungus and all of those life things in the soil, the good bacteria, of course, and the good fungus, because there's a lot of that. And you're giving energy to the plants from their waste products. It's a very kind of circle of life symbiotic relationship. So for me, my fascination and my personal passion is in how to feed the microorganisms so that we can build really great soil health without having to use a lot of synthetic or even organic fertilizer necessarily. I prefer to use compost whenever possible. Of course, I use things like Luke from In My Gardener's Trifecta, especially like right when I'm planting a tomato or something like that. I'll put it underneath and then plant the tomato. But I do really, really love the idea that I wouldn't have to do that someday, and that my soil health would just be, or my all of the fertility in my soil would just come from compost. So that's kind of my goal. The problem is, of course, in a very small urban environment, how do you produce enough compost for your garden? And I really can't, honestly. And it's a little scary to go get compost from other places because it's a little scary, honestly, to get compost from other places because there are so many instances that I've heard of, maybe anecdotally, where the compost has been contaminated accidentally from a nearby field, or just one of the inputs was contaminated with things that are particularly bad for tomatoes, green beans, peppers. I think the compost that I put in, you'll see these two big, that gray bed, and there's another gray bed behind it. I put compost in those a few years ago, or not, 1 year ago. I think it was last year, right before my gardening season in the spring. And my green beans were terrible. All of my peppers were stunted. Now, was that because I planted them too early and it got too cold? Or was it because of the compost that I put in that maybe had some remnants of an old contaminant in them? So it's a little dicey sometimes if you can find a really good compost source, but even sometimes, it's great 1 year and it's not great the next year. I'm not saying that to scare you, just these are experiences that gardeners have had. And so it's a wonderful idea to at least try to produce some of your compost on your own. Ooh, there's an ant on my leg. On your own site if you can. I don't have a ton of space, so I can't do a lot. And one of my favorite things to do when you don't have a lot of space is to focus on vermicomposting. Vermicomposting is composting with worms. One, it's a wonderful way to divert organic waste from landfills, which is another passion of mine. Putting organic waste in landfills it produces a lot of toxic gases. It's just, we're putting all of this waste in a place, and it's, for lack of a better term, wasting the wonderful nutrient-rich resources that are in all of that food. We talk about depleting the soil. Well, we're putting plants in the ground, and then we're pulling those plants out, and all of the nutrition they've sucked out of the soil is coming with them, because that's their job. Their job is to feed off of the soil, and then we're leaving the soil without food for the rest of the microorganisms. If you look back historically, or if you look at like a forest or something like that, the tree grows, it drops its leaves, the leaves compost into the soil. It all kind of stays in this cycle of life, versus now we bring in fertilizer, grow grass, cut the grass, bag the grass up, put it in the landfill. Hopefully it goes in the local city compost if you're lucky enough to have one of those. But for me, I like the idea of short circuiting as much as possible and composting as much of my green waste as I can on site at my house. And I even compost. One of my neighbors comes over and dumps her vegetable waste into my compost bin. Another neighbor, whenever she cuts up a big watermelon or has lots of organic waste, she'll send me a text and drop it off on my front porch, and I'll go put it in the compost. In the fall, I'll go and collect pumpkins. Pumpkins are a wonderful source. And, my goal is to have as diverse of inputs as I can to my bin. So, of course, we buy some of our groceries from the grocery store. Those go into the bin. Whether it's organic or not, I'm not terribly concerned. Each input is small, and particularly when I'm doing vermicompost. The vermicompost is very tolerant. Actually, once you get a good system going, it's very tolerant of different inputs. If you've got a kind of delicate system that's often out of balance, I wouldn't put in things like, I wouldn't put onions in or citrus. But with my bin, it's so diverse. There's other bugs in there. I gotta warn you, there's lots of other bugs in there. And it is very well in balance, and it's been established over a few years, and it's quite big. It can tolerate a lot. I put in citrus, I put in onions, I sometimes put in food that's been cooked with oil a little bit, or maybe some of the light salad dressing, a little bit of leftover salad from that, which normally in one of those kind of pure layered vermicompost bins I wouldn't do, because there's not enough diversity in there for other bugs and stuff to kind of step in and decompose your waste. But in our bin, it is, and I'll show it to you. It's if you don't like bugs, fair warning, there are a lot of bugs involved in this process, not just worms. I put all these different things into the bin, and then basically just worm poop comes out the bottom. At least that's kind of what it looks like. I'll show you the end product. I might go get some gloves, but I'll show you the end product. And it's this beautiful vermicompost, which if you go buy a bag of vermicompost, it's fairly expensive at the store. And so I'm turning something that literally would be garbage, trash that I would throw in my trash bin if I didn't have a city compost. I do have a city compost because I'm in Austin, Texas, and our wonderful city does have a city compost. So anything that I don't put in my compost bin, my city compost, I'm putting in this vermi bin, or I also have a separate, mostly garden waste bin. I try to keep food out of it because it's open, and you can have problems with rats and mice and squirrels if you have an open compost bin. So I'm kind of excited. I want to show you our vermi bin, and I'll walk you through how we built it. Actually, let me tell you a little bit about the design. I should have brought the book out, but I found a textbook in a library about 10 years, maybe more than 10 years ago. And my now husband built me my first compost bin. I mean, that's how you knew he was a keeper, right? He built me a compost bin when we first started dating at our tiny apartment in San Francisco. And so he built this bin. I had a little backyard. I got very lucky with where I lived there, but I had a little backyard, and he built me this really big compost bin, and we moved it across the country. You'll see how big it is and think, oh my gosh, how did you do that? But it is kind of a flow through system. And basically you put all the stuff in the top, just pile in whatever you have. I filled it to the top all the time. And then over time, especially in the summer when it's warm, it flows through the bottom, and then you just get worm poop basically out the bottom. And this particular bin, I've experimented with different bins over time. I had a smaller one. At first, it was just a Rubbermaid double stack. That's a great inexpensive way to do it if you have some old Rubbermaids with the clip tops on them, like this big or so. And you just double stack them, drill holes. I drill holes in both layers because I found when I didn't drill holes in the bottom layer, really nasty in there. And so I really like the idea of the flow through system. All right, let's go. First, we're getting gloves because this stuff is, it's a lot, honestly. First step, my compost bin is definitely seen better days. It's kind of my junk pile off to the side of my house. This area gets shade almost the entire day. There's a building here, there's a tree up there, and the sun is kind of goes along that way. So this gets as much shade as possible. That's specifically for the summer. Yeah, it might get a little cold in winter, but honestly, we live in Texas, so that's not the main issue. The way this is constructed is it has wood, just 2x4s, and these are untreated. And then the outside has just plywood and real wood. You don't want to get MDF, that will disintegrate. This just originally had a plywood board on top. We added a second one. This is actually the schedule from our wedding, which is funny. And then down here, it started getting buried a little bit in the mulch, but that's where the vermicompost bin comes, or the vermicompost comes out. Right now, I will say the mulch has kind of taken over a little. You'll see a few things in here. There'll be rocks, maybe a little piece of metal or something that was in the bed. But if you look at this, there's maybe a couple big seeds or things that fall out. But for the most part, this is absolutely beautiful vermicompost, or just really well broken down compost. It's just really amazing stuff. And the way that this works actually is, let's see if you can get under there. Yeah, okay. So those are metal bars, and that's all the stuff that's just coming out. You can go in and scrape free, like I saw in videos, like you can go in and like scrape. See all that stuff falling down? Down is just the compost that kind of stays there until, okay, this is not poop. Kind of looks like it is, but it's not. So this right here, if you see these in your bin, these are a good thing. This is actually empty, but this is a black soldier fly pupate form. Obviously the guys left it, but these guys are amazing, especially if you have, if you ever throw any meat or like oil products or anything like that in your compost. These guys will break down pretty much everything. I honestly think they should be, rather than burn centers for at least organic waste, these guys would crush all of the waste. They're incredible. You can look up some stuff on them. They're pretty amazing. The one thing I see down there is like seeds and stuff, but hey, worst case I get like what, a pumpkin? All right, now if you are squeamish around bugs, maybe skip this part. Usually when I open this, there's bugs, cockroaches, all kinds of things. Oh, not today. Well, okay, I often open it at night, I guess, when I'm coming out to dump stuff. All right, I'm gonna dig around in this. This is actually left over from my bamboo steamer. I'm just gonna see if it breaks down. I run experiments in here all the time just to see what will break down. Yes, the more you break things down, the better they will compost, generally speaking, and also the wetter they are. So like I'm breaking this down, and that'll help it. This is bamboo, so I was really curious if it would break down, and I bet it will over time. Almost everything that's I put in here has. This is dryer lint. This is just paper towels. Yeah, they're bleached, but I don't put a ton of them in here, and they just break down. I tend to only buy egg cartons that are, I don't have chickens, so I tend to only buy egg cartons that are cardboard, so I can put those in here. That's kind of, so I always talk about like green versus brown waste. Like this is brown waste, basically think of things that are dead. I don't see it in here, but usually I have, I don't even break up most of this stuff. It eventually gets broken up. Oh yeah, I'll show you the worms in a second. Sometimes I put my coffee grounds in here. Sometimes I put them in my other bin. But coffee grounds, even though they're black, are actually considered green waste because they're full of nitrogen. So the rule of thumb is, you know, brown is kind of more dead stuff, or like cardboard or paper or kind of like straw or whatever. And then green stuff is anything that's kind of nitrogen rich, which usually is actual green stuff. This would be considered green waste. This is really more of like a mineral element. I think that's an old banana peel. But you can see how things break down over time. Yeah, there's bugs. There's lots of little bugs. Let's see what's in here. So there's these, which are sow bugs or pill bugs. They're different though. They're related to sow bugs, but I don't think they're the exact same. They're really great decomposers. So I don't mind other things being in my bin. I'll see beetles, and they leave the worms. They're all kind of harmonious. I don't know what these little white things are that run around, but they've always been part of the environment. this right here, as I'm digging in, you'll see these are my beautiful worms, and there's just tons and tons of them. There's little babies, there's big guys, and these are not your average garden variety, literally, worms. These are called red wrigglers, and I bought a package of them like 9 years ago or so, 8 years ago maybe, when we moved into this house. I had the compost bin, this bin, before I had my garden. The garden was actually me trying to have a compost bin. Look at those guys. See, there's little babies and all different sizes. I bought some from Uncle Jimmy's or something on Amazon. They showed up. Definitely don't do it in the summer. I did it in the winter, or maybe I didn't, like spring. And just stuck these guys in here in a pile of kind of rotting vegetable waste and mixed with cardboard. They love cardboard. And these guys have been going ever since. I've never had to replenish them. They'll get a little cold in the winter, and you just, the garden or the composting just kind of slows down, then it picks back up in the summer. Oh yeah, I'm running an experiment to see if these guys break down. This is a avocado pit. So I wanted to see if that would break down. Board in here. But you'll see if you kind of go down, and I probably should break up these eggs a little more. I mean, the more you've broken it down, the better. But honestly, getting this stuff out here is, 95% of the battle. So even if I don't have perfectly broken down everything, and I know lots of people say you have to have everything perfectly broken down, especially with worms. Like, look at, I don't know if you can tell from the screen, but that's beautiful, rich, mostly worm poop compost. And I think the eggs are actually, oh, there we go. I think the eggs, like the eggshells, are actually giving them a little bit of structure to the soil, which is great. I don't want to break it up too much in here, but yeah, that's lots and lots of, and there's other bugs in there, and that's okay. They're not upsetting the worms. So partly what they're doing, like the sow bugs and the cockroaches and all that, they're breaking down the food to a state where the worms can get it. So something else breaks it down. Bacteria can break it down. Sometimes these bigger decomposers, and then the worms can break it down. And yeah, there'll be little sticks and stuff in here, but the cool thing about this flow-through bin is, for the most part, just the vermicompost flows out. It'll flow out when it rains, when I water it. I do water this every so often. This is plenty moist, but you don't want it to be sopping wet, and you don't want it to be dry. So like over here, this section, especially on the top, is way too dry. I'm gonna mix that in over here. And like even this big chunk of cardboard, once it gets in there and gets all this stuff on top of it and gets wet, it should break down just fine. I also try to put a piece of cardboard on top, because sometimes if I feed this too heavily, the biggest annoying thing I'll get is a lot of gnats. You open this up and gnats come flying out. That was actually half what I was expecting today. But yeah, see this section over here is way too dry. If I dig down a bit, yeah, there's a little bit of composition happening, but honestly I need to add more wet waste to this side, and I need to, I need to rebuild it. There's a little gap down there, and I've had to short up. There was a particularly aggressive rat or squirrel or something a year or two ago, but I need to wet this portion. So what I'll do is I'll come in and just soak it down, or if there's a rainstorm, I'll try to remember to open the lid and just let it get really soaked. That'll start the decomposition process. Water really helps with decomposition. This is some pretty non-broken down stuff, but honestly, if I can get it wet and put a little bit of green waste from my veg on here, it'll disappear. I mean, I've filled this thing to the top with tomato plants and every other kind of plant you can imagine, and green waste and pumpkins and all kinds of stuff, and it all just eventually disappears. So it's pretty cool. But yeah, there's ants in here. I had an ant problem earlier this year, but I kept hosing it down and keeping it wet. Ants like dry environments, and that seemed to help a lot. There's a few ants, but not quite so many. I think for me, composting is mostly about just experimenting and keeping things balanced and making sure that that you have plenty of food in there, because you don't, think about it, if you don't feed it for a couple weeks, you might, and there's no more food left, you're actually kind of starving the microorganisms, and they'll decrease their population. So you won't have as many worms if you don't feed them but every quarter. versus if you feed them every month, versus if you feed them every day. If you feed them every day and you feed them more than they can eat, then the environment, they're gonna have too much food and there's gonna be a lot of rot. It's gonna smell bad. So you'll know it'll smell bad. This does not smell bad at all. Um, I've definitely overfed it before and it started to smell bad, and I back off or I add more brown waste to it, and it balances itself right back out. So you don't want to starve them, and you also don't want to overfeed them. So it's a balance, and you kind of figure it out over time, especially with vermicompost. So this compost bin is a little hard to see. It's I've just dumped a ton of garden waste in it. I've also been letting these pumpkins kind of grow over it, just for fun. I don't know. I just felt like it. I should be leaving it to where these doors are able to open so we can turn the compost, but realistically, it was too heavy for me to turn, and my husband's too busy to turn it right now. So I have chosen not to turn it, and it's just going to take longer to compost, basically. But it does. I mean, this thing, I'll fill it to like half full. You can see where it is now, and it'll go all the way down. So there's definitely good compost in here. I put a lot of green waste in. I kickstarted it last fall with. We built it last fall, and I kickstarted it with pumpkins and a bucket or two of coffee grinds from a local coffee shop that just lets you come grab them out of their waste bin. So, but let me show you how it's built. So we used some pallets. Scott was able to rebuild that pallet so it's a real wall. This one's still open. We'll eventually rebuild it. Believe it or not, that one's lighter weight than this one. And this is just chicken wire. We put some T-posts in the ground. There's a T-post in the ground. Oh, there's ants in there. Okay, good to know. Taking that off. That's weird. What an odd thing. Anyway, there's a T-post in the ground there. Goes all the way down to the ground. We hammered in a decent amount. This is probably 4 foot by 3 foot-ish. And it's covered in chicken wire on 3 sides, and then there's 2 pallet doors on the front. See if we can get a better view. There we go. And then we just piled up the waste in it, kind of toward the back. We put in brown. I put in a ton of pumpkins, chicken poop from somebody else who has chickens in my neighborhood, and coffee grounds. All that went in at the same time as my garden waste. And I just kind of piled everything in there, and then we turned it a few times to kind of really get it going. And then I've just been adding all summer. I had some extra straw that I put in there. I have green waste, and usually this is all my garden waste. So when these guys got a little bit of powdery mildew, I don't worry too much about garden diseases. I just throw everything in and then let it break down over time, and I let it break down quite a bit. So it's not like I'm going to use this in 3 months. I'll probably use it next spring, which is almost 9 or 10 months from now. And I'll definitely try to get it hot composting at some point in that process. And I would say, they usually say like a minimum 3 foot by 4 foot bed. I don't have enough compost all at once to really fill this thing. But I'd probably fill a green bin we have really big green bins, every other week if I didn't have this thing. This thing is amazing. Just so much stuff flows through it. Super quick walkthrough of my gardening system, or my composting system for my garden. Vermicomposting is my absolute favorite. If you have a small amount of space, vermicomposting is, I think, absolutely the way to go. The systems can be hard to get in balance at first, but once you get them in balance and you regularly feed them, keep them, if you're in a hot place, it's like Texas, absolutely keep them in a shaded area under a large tree, on the morning facing side of a building at the very least, and even I would still put it under a large tree on the morning facing side of a building. The only place that was good for us happened to be a afternoon sun spot, but the way the tree coverage and the building coverage are, it doesn't get a terrible amount of sun. And the goal is for it to not get super hot. Worms love California weather just like everything else, and they would really prefer, like, I'd say like 80, 85 degrees. Maybe, I mean, you can do down to 70, but they seem to really thrive at like 80, 85 degrees. And so when it gets up to 100, they still keep going as long as we can keep that bin wet and, healthy and happy for them. So if I had a small garden, and which I do, an urban garden, and I could only do one, I would absolutely start with vermicomposting. You can also get bins that are smaller. You can put them in your garage. You can, they have like layers in them. They're much more organized and less messy, and you won't get a lot of bugs in them. You'll just have the worms in there, and those work great. I just I like this bed because even if I leave it alone or forget to feed it for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, my neighbor does feed it, but I won't have any issues with the bed. I mean, it's been going for 8 years now, and it's totally fine. I've not had to add any worms to it. I haven't had to do almost anything except for just add more food to it, occasionally water it. So I love worms. They're one of my favorite creatures on the planet, which is maybe a little bit odd, but hey, I'm a gardener, so I guess I'm a little bit odd. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you have a wonderful day. If you haven't subscribed, please do. It helps me get kind of the word out about my channel, and helps me build a community, which is really my goal here. I want to build a Texas community full of gardeners that are helping each other build their gardens and deal with unique struggles to our region. Every region has unique struggles. Our number one struggle is heat. Number two is pests. Everybody has pests, but they're a little bit different in each place. And I want to create a place where Texas gardeners in particular can have a community they can work around, and they can build the best garden for them. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks. Bye.